Welcome to 13 Cents More, the podcast. I am E. Probilski, an author, editor, and book publisher. I have done all these different things for many years, and I am here to share book publishing insights, personal anecdotes, information about my books, and so much more. Let's get into it. Hey friends, this week we are talking about when to hire an editor because this question comes up all the freaking time, and I really thought it was important to address this. This question pops up pretty darn frequently in writing spaces. A new author, fresh off of writing their first draft, goes to Facebook or Discord or any of these spaces and says, "Hey look, I finished." Now what? And the rapid-fire advice that follows that is usually a mix of useful and damaging. Things like get it published, get it edited, celebrate it and then sit for a while, and then send it to me for marketing. I'm sure you have heard all of those. So what is the truth? That's kind of the million-dollar question and where it gets a little sticky. The answer to this depends entirely on your level of experience in the industry, since people at different points in their journey need different things. It also depends on how confident you are in your writing and craft skills, since that is absolutely a part of this. How to know what you need. Determining your personal requirements is a matter of both understanding what is out there and knowing what will benefit you the most. With first drafts, there are two main services I advise for new writers. You don't necessarily need both, but these are the angles I would suggest you take depending on where you are. So the first one is hiring a developmental editor, and the second is working with a book coach. I offer both of these services, and sometimes a project isn't ready for a developmental editor and requires coaching for things like deep levels of craft work. This is stuff like helping authors work with the parts of writing like knowing how to write in evocative language, deep diving into character voice, or doing things like looking into how to use tension and storytelling techniques for people who aren't educated in that at this point in their careers. A developmental edit looks at the things I mentioned in book coaching, but more identifies them in the manuscript itself. A dev editor will notice that a character's voice doesn't work as intended, or recognize that the pacing is wrong. Our job is to point out these difficulties and offer insights on how to fix them. A book coach walks you through the process of how to fix them and delivers a longer-term relationship rather than, here's the problems, go fix those. A book coach will be like, okay, so these are the problems you say you have, let's fix those together, and I will teach you how to fix them. Now, I have done developmental work on outlines before and given feedback on concepts for folks who don't have a word written and are struggling with their story structure. That is absolutely possible. However, at that point, usually people use developmental editing to identify things to work on with a book coach. Developmental editors might be the people who read the red flags, and the book coach might be the person to help you fix them. Again, assuming you need deeper and more long-term education than just a, hey, here's the things you should probably take a look at. So that sounds expensive, and unfortunately it can be, yeah. You can find people at many different price points. I tend to be toward the lower end since I specialize in new authors, but it's not free. Then again, a good developmental edit or a book coach is essentially like taking a college course on writing, tailored specifically to you and your unique needs. So if you frame it in that way, the cost makes sense. Also, as you gain experience, you probably aren't going to need developmental editing or book coaching long term unless you change genres or otherwise branch into places where you feel like you need more support. These expenses are short-term educational investments towards your writing career as a whole. They're not a perennial expense unless you kind of really want them to be. Some people need to have a coach in their corner, and that's okay. To give you a bit of insight on the cost, since it is high, when I'm doing one of these deep edits, I'm not just reading the book and analyzing the story structure. I'm oftentimes doing really heavy research. As a historian, I work with a lot of authors writing fantasy, historical, other types of fiction set in time periods before now. Whether the world is fantastical or not, I will ask questions like, hey, so if this group is entirely cut off from the outside world and have been for 100 years, where are they getting their metal? That's a question I have asked before. These thoughts and insights come from the fact that I have an $80,000 degree in European history with a focus on the Renaissance. You are gaining the benefit of my nearly 20 years of experience with handling, cleaning, and fighting with swords of various types. I'm a reenactor, and I know what fabrics and dyes and social constructs existed in various places across time, and I know how to research ones I don't know about. For more modern works, I have a deep well of knowledge on things like forensics and police procedure and hand-to-hand combat and a bunch of other stuff. Those are the insights, and that information, that's what you're paying for. You're paying for that coming from the fact that I have an $80,000 degree in European history. And you don't need to get the $80,000 degree in European history if you can just ask the historian, hey, what swords were used in this time period? And I can just tell you. I can tell you what the swords were, what they were used for, which swords were used in which manner, what armor they were wearing. You can absolutely ask Google those things, but if you don't know how to look for or word the information, and it can be really daunting. So if you don't know what you don't know, too, that's also a problem. Let me tell you, the number of times I have seen people using wrong textiles in historical-like books is significant. Or the number of times I've seen blatant evidence that people have no idea how armor worked and was worn it's high. I've seen a lot of that in movies, TV shows, books. It's everywhere. So when you're hiring me as a coach or as a developmental editor to look for these things, you're gaining the benefit of somebody who actually knows it. The next question, of course, is, so why do I need this? And honestly, you might not. That's kind of the complicated part of this. If your book is about something that doesn't require a lot of deep analysis in an area you aren't a subject matter expert on, and you have a strong grasp of story structure and craft, if you have a degree in creative writing, you might not actually need a developmental editor or book coach at all. That is a very real possibility. Not everyone needs us. However, there are also a lot of people who don't have that experience and knowledge, so you want to evaluate where you're at and what you think will benefit you. If you don't have any experience in writing fiction, and you don't really know story structure and don't have that background, then you might want to hire a professional who does. If you do have it, well, then you can move on towards other types of editing because you aren't going to need those pieces. I hear you asking, what do I do if I don't need that? Well, if you don't need the services of a developmental editor, your next step will be to set the book aside for a while and do some self-edits on the manuscript when you're satisfied with it. Once that's done, you work with beta readers for a while or use software like AutoCrit. Once you've done that, you can look for a liner copy editor to review things and put the final polish on before you send the book off for sale. If you're not self-publishing, you can kind of skip the line and copy editor most of the time, though some people still want to get their first couple of chapters polished. And some people want a full edit to increase their chances with an agent. I'm working with a client right now like that. And that's a valid thing. You can just start looking for an agent or publisher and write queries, but hiring an editor to polish at least the first couple of chapters is pretty common. As a final note in this week's episode, I wanted to talk about somebody that I recently encountered who claimed that editors who do developmental work and claim to do developmental work are predatory because we take money from authors when their books still need months of work. That is a quote. This is categorically untrue. If someone is trying to convince you to hire them to do copy editing on a first draft, I would beat them with a thesaurus and run. However, developmental editing and book coaching are designed to teach you the skills and knowledge you need to really get your book to that point where you can start doing the other types of editing. And some people really need that help. It's absolutely true that not everybody requires this work. I know people who've never written a novel but have a PhD in creative writing. They do not need my developmental editing most of the time. And the people that I work with who do coaching for that level of expertise, what they need is more help with the publishing process as a rule, or sometimes knowing what their audience wants. It's not about polishing their prose because they're expert writers already. It's about audience and so on. They know what they need on that score when they come to me. Nobody can tell you a singular true way that works for everybody. That kind of thing just doesn't exist. The only wrong way is the one that doesn't work for you, and if it doesn't get you to publishing and doesn't work for you, then it's wrong. And if something feels wrong for you, then don't pursue it. It's as simple as that. But don't assume that just because something worked for you or didn't work for someone else that the path is categorically wrong. It may just be a service that you don't personally need. For example, if you go to a mechanic and ask them to replace a perfectly good drivetrain that doesn't need replacing, the person making the mistake in that scenario is you. However, if someone else needs their drivetrain replaced and you tell them that it's not a necessary procedure, you're doing them a significant disservice. That car ain't gonna run.